Now, we all know cheap isn't good and good isn't cheap. Unless we're talking about Panda Express, I'm not gonna argue with y'all. But what if we can happily marry these together and build the perfect off-grid glamping site? Let's talk about it. Nice flippin' choice. What's up, you glamping guys and gals? It's Garrett Brown from the Nice Flippin' Choice channel, back again with some more glamping gumbo for your soul. Now, cheap is a subjective term, because what may be cheap to me may not be cheap to you, and vice versa. The only thing we can agree on that's cheap and bad for sure is Arby's, because I have no idea how they're even still in business. Who even eats Arby's?
I thought perhaps the end of days was upon us, but it turned out it was just a disoriented old lady in a champagne-colored Toyota Avalon, crashing into my world like DMB circa 1996.
I did a ton of research before I started my glamping site, figuring out all the ins and outs that I knew I would need to know when I was trying to build this up and keep my future plans for what I wanted to do with the site in sight. No pun intended, but it worked. I probably should have jumped in the fire even sooner, but I had a little analysis paralysis, but there's no better time than the present, as they say. So here we are. Now it's your turn. I decided to go a little further with my site. I didn't want to do off-grid after contemplating it a few times. I do have a full septic system, water well, electricity, all those things like that. It cost me quite a bit more, but it's gonna make my life probably a lot easier going forward. There's a misconception that off-grid is gonna be easy and cheap, and that's probably further from the truth than you can even realize. There's still a lot of infrastructure that goes in for off-grid things that are gonna absolutely happen if you do off-grid or on-grid. You gotta remember about road system, gates, other type of intricacies like that, tree cutting possibly, and even if you don't do the full on-grid amenities, there's a lot of back-end off-grid things you have to figure out. Now I'm gonna talk about the actual structures first, and at the end of the video, we'll talk about what are some of the necessity things that you're gonna have to spend on no matter what type of structure you pick. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number one. One of my favorite cheaper off-grid glamping ideas that I almost went with was a Lotus Belle tent. There's a lot of different versions out there. I think the main one is lotusbelletents.com or something along those lines. There's different ways that each one is built, and there's different amenities that can happen for them too. These range from about 1,000 to about 3,000 to finally get them to you for different styles and sizes. But I do think that is priced reasonably well for what you get. They hold up to the elements pretty well. You can kind of make these fancy and Instagrammable, you know, as the kids say these days. But there's a lot of kind of knockoff products too. If you want to give that a shot, I wouldn't personally recommend it, but you can probably get some of these for $600, $700, $800 if you really can look for it and you're okay with some of this material. Now, my number two favorite cheap glamping structure is the Davis King glamping package. It's a little more pricey than the Lotus Belle tents, and there's definitely some skills that will be needed for it, carpentry and some other things like that. But running about $3,500, these are really, really cool structures, very unique. They can add a different type of feel to the, you know, some of these other tents that a lot of people rent out. I think it would give you a competitive advantage if you use something like this and spend a little more upfront on the structure. But you're here for cheaper ideas, so let's keep it rolling. Number three is geodomes. Now, I have a geodome myself that I got from Pacific Domes. I went a little more high end on some of the things I had to acquire for it because I was getting permits and other things like that, so I needed architecture plans and some other different things of that nature. Now, while they are a little more pricey because they've been around a longer time and they just have better history of knowing how to make these things work, you know, you can probably find some of these domes if you're willing to take an Alibaba risk or Etsy or something along those lines. They might be in the couple thousand to, you know, 2,000 or 3,000 for a smaller one. I've stayed in a few of these domes and the quality is not even close. This, you know, the structure that holds them together is not anything like Pacific Domes and some of these higher end companies do, like F Domes and Portland Domes, I think, and there's a few others. But if you want to roll the dice with some of the cheaper ones, I see a lot of hosts that do it. Be my guest. You might be playing with fire, but hey. Number four is a Yurt. Now, just like geodomes, there are very high-end makers of yurts that have a lot of history and reviews to them. There's also a lot of lower level ones that you can roll the dice and hope that it actually turns out your way. I'm gonna put my disclaimer out there. Etsy apparently has anything you want to buy on it. Apparently everybody makes everything and puts it on Etsy. There's a lot of really cheap stuff I saw on Etsy. Would I do it? No. It may be for you.
Sometimes you just gotta cut a man loose.
Now, number five is a Tipi. I'm gonna throw a asterisk on this one because there are a lot of these out there and there's a lot of different Tipi builders. Nomadic Tipis is probably the biggest one, and they actually support a lot of these Native American tribes and things like that. I did briefly consider a Tipi, But for different reasons of cultural appropriation and other things like that, I did back out of it. But there is a high maintenance cost to these, and there also is a high setup cost to these, way harder than geodomes and other things. Do I personally recommend this one? No. If I was starting one and I didn't have a whole lot of money, I would 100% go with the Lotus Belle tent. That would definitely be my first one. Now, these are some of the best lower options that are out there. You can get some of these if you don't have the financing up front, maybe with a 0% interest credit card. I don't recommend doing that, but I understand that everybody has a dream and really wants to get started in some different things. And if a credit card is 0% interest and you'll be able to make it and you don't have an issue with getting some income, even if this doesn't work instantly for you. Somebody else may tell you differently, but I think we're here for a good time and not a long time. I'm gonna go after all my dreams that I have because I know in the end, the worst thing that can happen is I don't have any regret. You can't fail until you quit. Remember that. Now, this is when a lot more costs come up that people don't really expect at all. They think you're gonna put a tent down and boom, everything's taken off. It's Montclair jackets in the VIP section and everything's so cool. And back to life, back to reality. So besides purchasing or leasing your land from a landlord anyways, which is its own expense I'm not even gonna touch, because I do have a whole different video about finding land. I have a few different videos about finding land and different ways to actually get on land for a cheaper process. If I remember, I'll link it in the description, but or let me know in the comments if you want to find it and I didn't link it. I think I will though. So boom, first major cost, solar or electricity. Since you're going off grid, you're gonna need solar panels. Theirs are not cheap. Now you can have lower solar capabilities for maybe just a small fridge, some string lights, and maybe just enough that people can charge their phone. But even this is gonna run you about $1,500 on the very, very low end, probably closer to 25 to maybe even 5,000. You also need a lot of sunlight to power these too. So if you're in the middle of the forest with trees over top everywhere, there's gonna be some difficulties there that you're gonna have to figure out. Now, number two, which is honestly the worst part about all of this when you don't wanna go on grid, is the waste situation. Yes, compost toilets have become way more popular and they become way more efficient and easy to use. I personally wanted nothing to do with a compost toilet, and that's pretty much why I steered clear and went straight to utilities. They suck to change, they suck to deal with, they're definitely not luxurious, there's smells to them. You know, I'm sure there's gonna be some, well, you're wrong, they're so much better now and they help the earth and all that, and I completely understand. You caught me. We're not fighting that at all. But if you're willing or have someone you can pay to go change these out, get rid of the bags and all this extra stuff that has your extra in it, then be my guest. It was not for me though. Now these compost toilets will probably run you for about $1,000, but you also need to build the outhouse and other things that go with it. This could be up to about $3,000 to $5,000 to build it, and you know, there's other factors that go into it as well. And number three, you're gonna have to figure out your water situation. If you're not gonna have a water well out there or connect to city water somehow, you're gonna have some water tanks unless you're collecting rainwater and doing all that type of jazz. They have like 500-gallon tanks and they go up even higher than that. You have to have an ability for a company to have a truck get out there to deliver water to you unless you have some way to refill it, which you probably don't because that's why you need the water tanks. So these tanks can run you from about $1,000 to $3,000 a piece, and then you have to have somebody fill it and deal with it each month, which, you know, could be as low as a couple $100 to $500-600. The fourth piece is heating and cooling. No matter where you are in America or the world or wherever you're at, shout out to you if you're listening out there, you're gonna need either heating or cooling or a mix of both, because one of them, I'm sure you have one really bad season. There's definitely different ways that you can generate some of this without having full electricity or those type of amenities. But if you're in a colder area, it's gonna be tough because it is hard keeping heat inside of a dome or anything like that. You'll probably have to get some type of propane heater, some type of small one, get a bigger propane tank out there and just have it filled up occasionally. This is not cheap as well. A couple $1,000 for the propane tank, few $100 a month to refill it. Now, if you live in a more hot area, you're gonna have to figure out some type of cooling for it. You might have to have some type of fan. When you start getting to the hot areas without amenities like that, it's tough to really figure out because I'm closer to Houston, Texas, which you probably realize is hot and humid as hell. So my big concern from the beginning is figuring out how to make sure this place is cool. And I think I've kind of nailed that in. I've seen people put, you know, cowboy pools out there, giving, you know, ice bags with each, you know, stay, different things like that. But there's power that needs to be used with that. Somebody needs to deliver the ice. There's a lot of logistics that go into this that a lot of people don't necessarily realize. And the fifth thing, but definitely not the last, because there's a few I'm not touching on, is you're gonna need some type of road work to get to wherever you are. This costs way more than most people realize, and is also very, very critical to making sure your guest experience is there. I stayed at an off-grid place in Arizona a while back. The road was terrible. I had to rent a Jeep to get out there. There was a lot of factors in it that made it very difficult to stay at that place. I didn't want that in my site. I made sure to make sure the road was as perfect as possible, that any car could get back there. I've spent about $10,000 on this road. You can spend way more, it depending on how far it goes. This is a cost that a lot of people underestimate. So if you wouldn't think dirt and rocks is just getting so much more expensive, but it is. Now, having stayed in quite a few different off-grid areas, I can tell you that there are some times of the year that this becomes tougher for your guests. You may even need to shut down for a season. If it's too bad, there's some things you need to factor into this if you're gonna go this route. It is cheaper for sure up front, maybe a little more difficult to control on the back end, but there's a lot of people that do this very successfully though, so there is that market out there for it. And I believe that if you're smart enough to watch this channel and subscribe, then you can make it happen. Till next time, see y'all then. Peace.
Yeah.